You know, sometimes it just hits you out of nowhere. The other day, I was pulling a pie out of the oven, good apple cinnamon, just like Mama used to make, and for a second, I smelled him. Not the pie, him. That mix of cigarette smoke, motor oil, and aftershave from Woolworths. Lord have mercy, I nearly dropped the thing. Isn't that something? One smell, and you're not 84 anymore. You're 8. Standing barefoot in the kitchen, holding your breath, waiting for a man who said he was going out for cigarettes and never came back. They always say time heals everything. Well, I've had 84 years of time, and I'm still not so sure. Some things don't heal. They just settle deeper like dust in a crack. You learn to live around 'em. But lately, well, I've been wondering. Maybe some stories ain't meant to be carried forever. Maybe some of 'em gotta be spoken, even if your voice trembles a little while doing it. I ain't never told this to my grandkids. Not really. They've heard the name Walter whispered once or twice, maybe saw an old photo I missed throwing out. But they don't know. And if I'm honest, it's 'cause I wasn't ready. Not until now. You see, I was born in 1941, in a dusty little town called Casper, Wyoming. Back then, the world was smaller, not just 'cause we didn't have television or the internet, but 'cause we didn't ask too many questions. We were poor, I mean real poor. Didn't have a pot to pee in, kind of poor. Mama scrubbed other folks' clothes to keep us fed, and I learned how to make bread with nothing but flour, water, and prayer. But we were proud. We made do with what we had. And for a while, it was just the three of us, me, Mama, and Daddy. Walter James Menley. He was tall, broad across the shoulders. Always smelled like he'd been working under a car, which he usually had. Folks in town said he had hands like magic, could fix anything with a wrench and a little spit. He wasn't a laugher, not real easy with his affection, but when he looked at you, you felt like the only thing in the world worth looking at. At least I did. And then, one evening, right around the end of summer '49, he said he was going out to get cigarettes. I was sitting on the steps in my bare feet, swatting at mosquitoes and waiting for the stars to come out. He leaned down, kissed my head rough, like he was in a hurry, and said, "Be back in a jiffy." That was the last time I saw him, for over 40 years. Now, don't you go thinking this is some kind of movie. There wasn't no mystery, no search parties. Just a hole, a silence. Mama told folks he left to find work in Texas. Told me the same thing. Then she threw out his photos, his boots, his coat, acted like he never existed. And as the years passed, I started to believe maybe she was right. Maybe I imagined the parts that were good. Maybe the bad parts ran too deep to fix. But you know what's strange? You can bury a secret deep, deep down, but it don't die. It waits. In dreams, in smells, in the crackle of an old song on the radio. And every now and again, it raises its hand and says, "I'm still here." And lately, well, I've been dreaming about him again. Not the man I saw last, but the one I remembered. The one I missed. And that's why I'm sitting here now talking to you, Sweet Pea, instead of keeping this to myself. Because it's time you knew the story. The whole story. And let me tell you something, it don't go the way you think it will. Back then, life was simpler, maybe a little slower, but it was full, too, in its own way. Casper, Wyoming, wasn't much more than a dusty speck on the map, sandwiched between oil rigs and endless stretches of prairie. The air smelled of grease, wildflowers in spring, and a little bit of loneliness you couldn't quite shake. Folks around here worked hard, harder than you'd think, especially for a town that the world mostly forgot. But they were good people. People you could count on. I was just a little girl then, no older than 8 or 9, running barefoot through dirt streets, chasing after the neighbor's dog, or helping Mama in the kitchen. Mama was the strongest woman I knew, washing clothes for the women who lived in the grand houses downtown just to keep a roof over our heads. She never complained much, but her hands told the stories, rough and worn, like leather from years of scrubbing and folding. Our home was small, no bigger than a shoebox, with creaky wooden floors and a porch swing that squeaked when the wind blew. I used to sit out there for hours, watching the sun dip behind the oil derricks, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. That's where I dreamed, with a pocket full of wildflowers and the whole wide world just waiting to be discovered. Back then, I believed in simple things. I believed in kindness, in the power of a smile to change a day. I believed that people who loved you would always come back, no matter what. I believed that family was forever, even when it didn't feel that way. You see, as a child, the heart is a stubborn thing. It holds tight to hope, even when the world around it starts to crumble. Walter, my daddy, was a big part of those dreams. He wasn't much for words, but when he smiled, you felt it down to your bones. He was no spring chicken, always had a hard day's work behind him, but his hands had a magic touch, fixing everything from busted lawnmowers to squeaky door hinges. I used to watch him at the workbench, grease smudged across his face, and think how lucky I was to have a man who could make broken things whole again. School was a mixed bag, but I liked it well enough. My teachers were tough but fair, and I was always eager to learn. Sometimes, I'd sneak away from the chores just to get lost in a book, imagining faraway places and adventures that seemed bigger than Casper's dusty streets. But mostly, my world was right there, between Mama's kitchen, the little church down the road, and the dusty fields where I'd pick wild berries in the summer. Those summers felt endless. Long, hot days full of cicadas' songs and ice-cold lemonade. We didn't have much, but we made do with what we had. I didn't know about the weight of the world then. I was too busy chasing fireflies and learning to bake bread, with Mama's patient hands guiding me. I had dreams, oh yes, big ones, though I might not have called them that at the time. I dreamed of a life where love was simple and hearts stayed whole. I dreamed of a family that never broke apart, where good people stayed good, and where the night never brought shadows too dark to face. I believed in a world where kindness was the greatest treasure, and where the ones you loved always found their way back home. Sometimes, I'd sit on that porch swing as the stars blinked awake, wondering what the future held. Would I marry a man with hands like Daddy's? Would I have children who'd chase fireflies in the yard? Would life be as gentle as I hoped, or would it surprise me with storms I couldn't see coming? I didn't know then that the world could be cruel in ways a child's heart couldn't understand. I didn't know that the man who kissed me goodnight one summer evening would vanish like a ghost in the wind, leaving behind nothing but questions and a silence so loud it echoed through the years. But back then, before the shadows fell, I held on to that one stubborn belief that people who love you always come back. That kindness is the strongest thing in the world. And that even when the night is darkest, the dawn is just waiting to break. And Lord have mercy if that ain't a lesson worth holding on to. You know, life has a funny way of sneaking up on you. One moment you're sitting on your porch swing, watching the sky change colors, and the next, fam, something shifts and you don't quite know how to hold on to what you thought was steady. That's how it was for me when it all began to unravel. I was just a kid, 8 years old, if you can believe it, still hanging on to the innocence that comes before the hard knocks. Walter was still round then, or at least I thought he was. But there was this day that settled into my bones like a quiet warning. Mama was off washing clothes at Mrs. Grady's house down the street. I was home, playing with my rag doll by the window when I saw the mailbox flop open. A letter came in, the kind of letter that didn't have a stamp like the usual birthday cards or postcards from Aunt May in Colorado. This one was plain, worn, and smelled faintly of smoke and sweat, like a man who'd been carrying it in his pocket for a while. I remember my heart beating faster than I'd ever felt before, and Lord have mercy, I didn't know why. It was just a letter after all. But something told me it wasn't like the others. I didn't have the courage to open it right then. I tucked it under my pillow and went about my day, but the heaviness hung in the air like the first thundercloud of a summer storm. That evening, Mama came home earlier than usual, her face tighter than I'd ever seen it. She didn't say much at dinner, just kept stirring the stew and glancing out the window like she was waiting for something. I wanted to ask about the letter, about Daddy, but every time the words hovered on my lips, they'd catch in my throat. You know, honey, she said finally, voice softer than a whisper, sometimes people have to leave for reasons you don't understand. It ain't always because they want to. I nodded, not knowing quite what that meant, but feeling it deep down. That night, I held my doll tight and prayed the letter would bring good news, even though my heart told me it wouldn't. The days that followed were strange. Neighbors whispered behind closed doors. Mrs. Parker from down the block said she saw Daddy at the edge of town, looking tired and worn. I remember peeking through the curtains, hoping to catch a glimpse, but he never came back. School became a blur. I tried to focus on reading and arithmetic, but all I could think about was that letter and the silence it brought. I wondered if Daddy was angry or scared, or if he missed me as much as I missed him. One afternoon, Mrs. Simmons, my third-grade teacher, pulled me aside after class. She gave me a small, folded paper, another letter, this one in handwriting I didn't recognize. It was from a man named Mr. Johnson, saying he was trying to help Daddy with some troubles. I folded it carefully and slipped it into my pocket, wondering if I'd ever see my father again. Looking back, that letter was the first sign of the storm to come. It was the crack in the calm that told me things were about to change forever, even if I didn't understand it then. My heart was a jumble of hope and fear. I wanted to believe Daddy would walk back through that door, like he always did after a long day's work, with that faint smell of grease and smoke. But something in me knew it wouldn't be that simple. I didn't have the words to say it then, but looking back now, I see that moment as the start of a long journey, a journey through silence, secrets, and the kind of pain that teaches you more about life than any book ever could. That day, when that letter arrived, my world shifted, and I was just a little girl caught in the middle of it all, trying to hold on to what was left of her family and her dreams. Well, you know how life just keeps on turning, whether you're ready or not. After that letter came, things didn't get easier, not by a long shot. It's funny how silence can grow louder than any words. At first, it was just an empty chair at the dinner table. Then, it became an emptiness in the whole house, like the walls were holding their breath. But nobody talked about it, not really. That's just how we did it in those days. Mama tried to keep things together, bless her soul. She worked herself ragged, scrubbing clothes for every woman in town, trying to keep food on the table and a roof over our heads. But I saw her nights, those long, quiet nights when she'd sit by the window and stare out at nothing. I knew she was crying, but she never let me see. The neighbors, well, some were kind and some weren't. Whispering started. You'd catch a glance or hear a muttered word when you walked by. She's raising that girl all alone. Wonder what really happened to that man. You can't trust folks who don't keep their family together. Land sakes alive, that kind of talk stings worse than a slap sometimes. I felt it too, deep in my bones. Like I was carrying a weight nobody else could see. I was angry. So angry. Angry that my daddy left without a word. Angry that Mama acted like he was a stranger. Angry at myself for not knowing what to do with all those scary feelings. I was scared too. Scared that if I said too much, if I cried too loud, people would look at me different, like I was broken or bad. And shame. Oh, the shame was heavy. I thought maybe it was my fault somehow. Maybe if I'd been a better daughter, or said the right words, or kept quiet enough, maybe he'd have stayed. That kind of thinking eats at you, you know? It's like carrying around a rock in your pocket that you can't drop. School wasn't a safe place either. Kids can be cruel in small towns. I'd hear the whispers, see the sideways looks. Your daddy's gone, they'd say like it was a secret we all shared. I wanted to tell them to mind their own business, but the words got stuck. I didn't want to be different, but I was. And that loneliness settled in like a shadow I could not run. Mama and we didn't always see eye to eye. Sometimes, her silence felt like a wall between us. I wanted to ask questions, to understand, but she'd just shake her head or change the subject. That's the past, Doris. You focus on what's ahead, she'd say, but the past was all I had left. I didn't know how to move forward without it. One day, the landlord came round, saying we couldn't keep up with rent anymore. Things were tight, tighter than they'd ever been. We had to pack up and move to a smaller place on the other side of town. That felt like losing a part of my childhood, packing away memories with every box. I remember the night before we left, sitting on the floor of that old house, clutching a faded photograph of Daddy. I whispered into the dark, "Why did you leave us? Were you scared? Were you sorry?" No answer came but the creak of the wind outside. But even in that mess, there were moments of kindness. Mrs. Grady down the street brought over a pot of stew, and Mrs. Parker lent me a book about faraway places. It wasn't much, but it reminded me that even in hard times, there's some good left. Still, inside, I was stuck between two worlds, the world I wanted to believe in, where Daddy would come home and everything would be okay, and the cold, hard one where silence and secrets ruled. That's when the real struggle began. Could I hold on to hope without losing myself? Could I forgive the man who disappeared? Could I forgive the woman who said nothing? I didn't have the answers then. I just had the quiet fear that some wounds don't heal, they only change shape. Looking back, those were the years that taught me more about courage than any storybook ever could. The courage to face a world that doesn't always make sense. The courage to love, even when love feels broken. And the courage to keep going, even when your heart feels like it's breaking in two. I remember the day like it was carved into my very soul. The kind of day where time just stops and the whole world tilts on its axis. It was a day that changed everything, that broke something inside me that I wasn't sure could ever be put back together. I was grown then, a mother myself, with two little ones running round the house. Life had gone on, or at least I thought it had. But then, out of the blue, I got a phone call that made my knees weak and my heart pound so loud I thought it'd burst through my chest. A man on the other end told me my father, Walter James Menley, had been locked up all these years. 40 years. 40 years behind bars for a killing in a bar fight. A man he said he didn't mean to hurt, but someone died. The law gave him a sentence that stretched decades, and all this time, I'd been told he just disappeared. I remember, Lord have mercy, the clock on the wall seemed to stop ticking. The room got cold. I sat down hard, clutching the phone like it was a lifeline and a noose all at once. I couldn't breathe right. It was like I was drowning in shock and sorrow all at the same time. For years, I'd carried this hole inside me, the empty chair, the silent nights, the unanswered questions. And now I knew the truth, but it wasn't the one I'd imagined. It was darker, heavier, and full of pain I wasn't ready to hold. My daddy wasn't just gone. He was locked away, punished for a crime that split my family apart. I thought about the little girl I'd been, the one who believed in homecomings and second chances. And I wondered if she would even recognize the woman I'd become, scarred by silence, yet still aching for some kind of closure. That day, I lost more than just a father. I lost the story I told myself to get through the nights. I lost the faith in a simple kind of love. And I lost a piece of my own heart that I'm not sure ever quite healed. But even in that darkness, there was a strange kind of relief. Relief in knowing the truth, as painful as it was. Because sometimes, not knowing is worse than the worst thing you can imagine. I spent hours just sitting there, tears streaming, trying to make sense of a lifetime of questions that suddenly had answers, but no comfort. I thought about Mama, and how she must have carried this burden alone all those years, hiding the truth to protect me. I thought about my own children, and how I wanted them to understand that life is messy and painful, but still worth living. That day broke me and built me at the same time. I realized forgiveness wasn't just about the one who's done wrong, it's about freeing yourself from the chains of anger and hurt. I didn't know if I could forgive him yet, but I knew I had to try for my own peace. And as the sun set that evening, casting long shadows across the floor, I whispered a prayer not just for my father, but for all of us who carry wounds that don't show. Because sometimes, the hardest thing to do is to face the truth head-on and still find a way to keep loving. After that day, after the truth hit me like a freight train, there was a silence so deep it almost swallowed me whole. Not the kind of silence you hear between words, but the kind that fills up all the space inside you, like an empty room that once was full of laughter and life. For a long time, I didn't know how to be myself anymore. The woman I was, the little girl who believed in simple things like kindness and family, felt like a ghost. Like she'd vanished along with the years I spent holding on to a hope that was never going to come true. Life went on, sure, but it felt colder, harder. The things that once brought me joy, baking bread with my grandkids, the smell of rain on dry earth, Sunday afternoons at church, were tinged with a quiet sadness that I couldn't shake. It was like carrying a shadow with me, one that stretched longer every day. I found myself asking over and over, how do you move forward when a part of your heart is still stuck in the past? How do you trust again when the ones you love carry secrets so heavy they almost break you? For a long time, I didn't have answers. I just had the ache of loss and the silence that followed. Mama was gone by then, and without her steady presence, the house felt emptier than ever. I'd sit in the quiet of the evening, staring out the window, feeling the weight of years pressing down on me. My faith, well, it wavered. Lord, have mercy, I prayed and prayed, but sometimes it felt like the prayers just bounced off the ceiling. I questioned if God had been listening all along or if I was just talking to the walls. But I kept on praying because that's what we do, ain't it? We hold on to whatever little light we can find, even when it's flickering. I didn't talk much about Daddy after that. Not with anyone but myself. Some days, I'd feel the anger bubble up, anger at him for leaving, at Mama for keeping secrets, at the world for being so unfair. Other days, the tears would come easy, like rain on a tin roof, quiet and steady. But somewhere in that silence, I began to find a new kind of strength. Not the kind that shouts or demands answers, but the kind that whispers gently, telling me to keep breathing, keep living, keep loving even when it's hard. I started to tell my story, little by little, to my children and then to my grandchildren. Not all at once, Lord, no, but in pieces, like patchwork on an old quilt. Because sometimes, sharing your pain can help mend the holes you thought would never close. And I learned that healing isn't a straight road. It's full of twists and turns, good days and bad. Some days, The past feels close enough to touch, and others, it's just a shadow fading into the light. I'm not the same woman I was before. I'm older, yes, but I'm also wiser. I carry the weight of my story, but I don't let it define me. I've learned that sometimes the hardest thing is to accept what you cannot change and to find peace in the parts of life you still can. So here I am, sitting on my porch, telling you the story not because it's easy, but because it's true. Because even in the darkest chapters, there's a light that never goes out. And that, my dear ones, is the kind of strength I hope you carry with you always. You know, life has a way of surprising you when you least expect it. After all the years of silence, loss, and carrying that heavy weight, I never thought I'd find a spark of hope again. But sometimes, that little spark shows up in the quietest places, like the first ray of sunlight peeking through a cloudy sky. It started with something small. One afternoon, I was at the local community center, just sitting with a cup of tea, watching the folks come and go. A young woman approached me, her eyes kind, but tired. She reminded me of myself when I was younger, carrying burdens no one else could see. She asked if I could help her learn to bake bread like I used to with my mama. And well, I couldn't say no. That small moment, just teaching her the simple art of bread making, gave me something I hadn't felt in a long time. A purpose, a reason to smile beyond the surface. You see, in sharing something as ordinary as bread, I found a way to give a little piece of myself away, and in turn, it came back to me tenfold. It reminded me that even after all the pain and the years of waiting, life still offers chances to start anew. That we don't have to carry our past like a chain dragging behind us. Sometimes we can use it to build bridges instead. That day, I began to see that maybe forgiveness isn't just for the person who wronged you. It's for yourself, for your own peace. And maybe, just maybe, it's possible to find a little light inside the darkness. I started going to community events, helping where I could and reconnecting with old friends. Each small step was a gentle nudge, a whisper telling me that I still had a place in this world, that my story wasn't finished. The grandkids noticed, too. They said Grandma seemed brighter, more like the woman they remembered from the old family stories. And I think they were right, because I felt it too, a slow, steady blooming inside me. Hope isn't a loud thing. It doesn't shout or demand attention. It's quiet, like a soft breeze that you almost don't notice until it's carrying you forward. I learned that it's okay to be fragile, to take things slow, and to let yourself heal at your own pace. Life isn't about forgetting the past. It's about learning to live with it and finding joy in the moments that still matter. And so here I am, at 84, still learning, still growing, still hopeful, because that's what life is, a series of chances. Some we grab with both hands, and some slip right through our fingers. But every day is an opportunity to find that little light and hold on tight. Maybe the story of mine will remind you, too, that no matter how heavy the burden, there's always room for hope, always room for a new beginning. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's that it's never too late to take that first step. There comes a time in a life like mine when you find yourself standing at a crossroad, looking back at all the years, the heartaches, the silence, and wondering if you'll ever be free of it all. For a long, long time, I held on to the pain like it was a part of me. It was wrapped around my heart like a cold blanket I couldn't throw off. But deep down, I knew I had a choice. One afternoon, I sat in my old rocking chair holding a faded photograph of Daddy, Walter James Mendley. The edges were worn, just like my memories. I traced his face with a trembling finger and whispered to myself, it was what it was. The past is the past. And in that moment, I felt a weight begin to lift. I realized I didn't have to carry the burden forever. I didn't have to let those years define me or steal the rest of my days. I could forgive, Not just him, but myself, Mama, and the whole tangled mess of our story. I could choose to live. That day, I gathered some old letters, the ones I'd tucked away in a box for decades. Some were full of regret, some full of unanswered questions. But I didn't burn them or throw them away. I folded them neatly and placed them in a small wooden box, a symbol that the past was still there, but it wasn't the road I was walking anymore. I chose to live, I said out loud, with a quiet strength I hadn't known I had. No more pretending, no more bitterness. Just living. It wasn't an easy choice. Old wounds don't heal overnight, and some days still catch me off guard. But every time those shadows creep in, I remind myself that I have the power to let them go. That my story isn't just about loss or pain, it's about resilience, love, and hope. Since that day, I started taking little steps toward joy, something I thought had slipped through my fingers for good. I garden again, planting flowers that remind me life keeps pushing through even the hardest soil. I write letters to my grandchildren, telling them not just the story of Daddy Walter, but the story of strength that lives inside all of us. I even reached out to some old friends I'd lost touch with, mending fences and sharing laughter I thought I'd forgotten how to find. Life, I'm learning, is a series of choices, and every day is a chance to make a new one. Saying goodbye to the past doesn't mean forgetting it. It means carrying it with grace and letting it teach you instead of weigh you down. It means finding peace in a story that wasn't perfect, but was yours. So here I am, 84 years young, still rocking gently on my porch, still smelling that apple pie in the oven, still remembering. But now, I remember with a heart that's lighter and a spirit that's free, because I chose to live. And that, my dear ones, makes all the difference. You know, I've lived long enough to see the world change more times than I can count. But there's one thing that never changes. Life has a way of teaching us lessons we don't always want to learn in ways we don't always expect. And sometimes, the hardest lessons are the ones that shape us most. Looking back on my story, the loss, the silence, the years of not knowing, I realize now that what I thought was the end was really just the beginning. I spent so long waiting for answers, for closure, for a sign that things would be okay. But the truth is, sometimes life doesn't hand you neat little packages. Sometimes it hands you a jumble of broken pieces and expects you to figure out how to make sense of them. What I learned, what I truly hold on to, is that waiting for someone else to fix your story or for the past to change is a heavy burden. It's like sitting by the window watching the rain, hoping it'll clear up on its own. But the rain keeps falling and the waiting wears you down. Maybe it's time, I think, to stop waiting. To stop holding your breath for a door that may never open. Because life isn't about waiting for things to get better. It's about making them better with what you've got right now. I've come to understand that forgiveness isn't just about the other person. It's about freeing yourself from the weight of anger and hurt. It's about finding peace when the world feels like it's gone all wrong. And here's another truth: family isn't always perfect, and sometimes people disappoint us in ways that leave scars. But that doesn't mean love disappears. Love changes, stretches, and sometimes breaks, but it also has a way of finding new shapes. Love becomes the courage to carry on, the choice to keep carrying even when it's hard. I want the folks listening to this to know, especially my grandkids, that life will hand you heartbreaks and mysteries, and you won't always get the answers you crave. But you will get a chance to write the next chapter. You get to decide how your story goes from here. Maybe you're carrying a secret, a pain, or a silence that feels like it'll never end. Maybe you're waiting for someone to come back, or for a wound to heal itself. I want to tell you gently, it's okay to let go of the waiting. It's okay to choose your own peace. It's okay to find light in the cracks. That's the heart of what I've learned, not from books or sermons, but from the hard, quiet moments that stretch across a lifetime. That peace comes from within, and the greatest strength is knowing when to hold on and when to set free. So, maybe it's time for you too to stop waiting, to start living, to carry your story with grace and open arms, and to find joy even in the imperfect parts. Because that's how life goes on. That's how healing begins. And that's how love, real love, lasts. Well, here we are, at the end of this little journey I've shared with you. And I hope, from the bottom of my heart, that you felt a bit of what I've carried all these years, the love, the loss, the quiet moments that shape who we are. This story isn't just mine. It's all of ours in one way or another. Because every family has secrets. Every heart holds its own kind of ache. I want you to know that telling the story today wasn't easy. But sometimes, the hardest stories are the ones worth telling. They remind us that life is messy, complicated, and filled with surprises we can't always understand. But in that mess, there's also beauty. There's strength. There's hope. I'm sitting here nearly 85 years old, with memories swirling around me like leaves in the wind. And I can't help but wonder, what about you? What stories do you carry that you haven't told yet? What truths are waiting in the quiet corners of your heart? Now, here's a question I've been thinking about a lot lately. Do you believe that true love is meant to come back? That some connections, no matter how broken or lost, still find their way home? I ask this because sometimes, in the stillness of the night, I feel like my daddy remembers. Not just the little girl I was, but the woman I've become, the one who learned to forgive, to hope, and to live beyond the pain. Sometimes, it feels like he's out there somewhere, carrying his own regrets, maybe thinking of the family he left behind. But that's just me, holding on to a flicker of something I can't see. And maybe that's what love is, holding on, even when you're not sure what you're holding on to. This story is about more than just the past. It's about today and tomorrow and the choices we make to carry our histories with grace. It's about finding peace in the pieces and about knowing that no matter where life takes us, we are never truly alone. So, as I wrap up here, I want to thank you for listening, for sitting with me on this porch of memories and heartache and hope. I hope it reminds you to be gentle with yourself and with those around you, to hold your loved ones a little tighter, to speak the truths you've been keeping locked away. And I leave you with this, maybe a gentle nudge or a soft whisper in your heart. What story are you ready to tell? And how will you choose to live it, starting today? Sometimes, I think the answers aren't about finding closure, but about opening ourselves to what's still possible. Thank you, dear ones, for being here, for sharing this moment, for carrying a piece of the story with you. And maybe, just maybe, love is the thread that ties us all together, across time and space, in ways we can't always understand.